Hello all, welcome to Anago's webinar in collaboration with Hindawi, which will aim to help researchers understand the significance of good ethical conduct and focus on explaining the most common type of research misconduct, plagiarism. Today, we have with us our expert speakers, Professor Michael Gottsman and Ben Dickinson. Michael is an acclaimed biologist, a published author, and a distinguished instructor with more than 20 years of extensive research experience in the field of molecular biology, cell culture, and biotechnology. He has a doctorate in biology from the Graduate Center, City University of New York, USA, and is currently working as a senior scientist in IBEX Biosciences LLC. Michael has publications in established journals such as Elsevier, Springer, Wiley, and Biomed Central, and is also a recipient of prestigious awards for his remarkable contribution to research and education. At Anago Academy, Michael guides research scholars at every step of their publication journey through interactive training sessions and helps them build a rewarding career in academia. In this session, Michael will discuss major ethical issues and share best practices and tips to ensure publishing a plagiarism free manuscript. Ben currently manages a team of research integrity editors at Hindawi who are responsible for identifying and resolving ethical concerns in submitted and published articles. Before Hindawi, Ben has worked as an assistant editor for the BMC series of journals, part of Springer Nature, and also as a research integrity specialist for Frontiers. In this session, Ben will introduce us to Hindawi's approach to publication ethics and plagiarism, its plagiarism policy. We extend a warm welcome to both our speakers and thank them for joining us today. Before I hand over the mic to Michael, I would like to give you all a brief introduction about Anago. We are the world's leading author service providers, and our author first, quality first approach ensures that our authors receive only the best quality output and excellent user experience at all times. This unrelenting focus on authors' needs means that we never compromise on our quality systems and processes at any cost. All our services are designed keeping in mind the author's needs. Enago Academy is our author training platform that educates authors to several resources, including webinars as well as live workshops. We also have an e learning platform for researchers called Enago Learn, along with live one on one consultation platform called Enago Consult. Enago offers world-class services to researchers at different stages of their research career, such as two-editor system, English language editing service, academic and non-academic translation service, manuscript preparation service, and publication support service. The Enago promise guarantees that manuscript edited by us will never be rejected based on poor language. On a rare occasion, if rejection occurs, we will take full responsibility for re editing the paper for resubmission at no additional cost. Enago's comprehensive after sales service support will help you at every stage until the manuscript is published. They are designed to take care of every need from the time you receive our main service until you are published. Enago's research communication service are designed to help you effectively present your research data. In case you are interested in any of these services, feel free to email us at academy@enago.com. Without any further delay, I will now hand over the mic to our first speaker. Over to you, Michael.
Uh, Thank you so much. Talk, we will look at the overview of research and publication ethics. importance of research ethics, major ethical issues and how to avoid infringing on them, how to draft a plagiarism-free manuscript, and legal consequences of violating intellectual property rights. So first, we will begin with an overview of research and publication ethics. When it comes to research, what are the publication ethics? Well, we must focus on applying moral principles, such as standard guidelines to maintain scientific integrity. When conducting research, editors, reviewers, founders, and publishers are all equally accountable to ensure the dissemination of accurate research data. We must conduct ethical conduct at all critical stages while conducting a research study, such as the collection of data, analysis, reporting, and publication of information about research subjects. So it begins with the protection of confidentiality. We must review scientific validity. We must excuse me, fair contribution by all authors. So we must give full accreditation to all authors who have contributed to these publications. We must maintain a benefit to risk ratio, informed consent, and the review must be unbiased. So this prevents from the fabrication of data or data results. We cannot falsify or manipulate research material or results. And the third, and something that we at Enago ensure, is that the manuscript itself is plagiarism free and does not use anyone else's work without due credit. So the publication of ethics related aspects include authorship, copyright, and conflict of interest. Okay. Another major ethical issue is salami slicing, where you take one piece of data, cut it into small slices for several publications. The other aspect is citation manipulation, in where you cite your friend's articles, so they cite your articles. And last but not least is copyright infringement, where you actually just take someone else's manuscript and present it as your own, or any unethical issue within that aspect. So researchers themselves are responsible for ethical practice while collecting data. They must give credit to original sources and avoid plagiarism. The Research Ethics Committee is responsible for validating ethical practices performed while researchers are conducting research. There are peer reviewers. Their responsibility is for ethical practices as well. So they review a manuscript, which is submitted by authors, to provide constructive comments. There are also editors and publishers that are responsible for ethical practices while accepting manuscripts for publication. Now, the importance of research ethics. It's important for the reputation in the research field, for the academic, the researcher, for the editor, for the reviewer, as well as the publisher, and the Research Ethics Committee. Support of collaborative work. All work must be fair and mutually respected. Open the doors to collaborative work with experts in your research area. So when you give proper accreditation for your collaborators, they can give it to you as well. This creates this mutual reciprocity. We must ensure accountability. Researchers must be accountable for all their actions that they take in the process of manuscript publication. Protection of research participants. So we must ensure regulation on conflicts of interest. Whose idea is this manuscript? We must give proper accreditation. We must look out for misconduct. Research involving humans or animals are conducted without any malpractices. We must look at the welfare of humans and animals. Ensure credibility. which increases the confidence of readers and also increases the chance of getting your future research funded. So when ethical requirements are looked at, we must have a proper design and implementation. It is important to follow professional and moral codes while conducting studies on human and animal issues. We must avoid misconduct. Misconduct in the form of data falsification or fabrication should be prevented. Environmental and safety regulations ensure no harm was done to any property or subjects involved in this study. How can we avoid ethical issues? Well, honesty comes first. We cannot fabricate, falsify, or misrepresent data while reporting. The data must be scrutinized. Avoid human error and negligence while examining your work and working with your peers. Respect for intellectual property. Give due credit where due credit is deserved. And honor intellectual properties in the form of patents, copyrights, or any other forms. Avoid bias. Have an unbiased and purely scientific approach to examining data, design, and interpreting the data, decision-making, and research-related aspects. Confidentiality. You must maintain anonymity and confidentiality of all participants of your study, defense records, and other sensitive information. Publication. Selection of the journal for publication of your article that strictly adheres to publishing ethics. Abiding by institutional governmental laws. Strictly follow the guidelines and policies of the institutional and government. And informed consent, which respects the dignity and privacy of your study participants by getting assigned an informed consent form. Now, how can we ensure to have plagiarism-free manuscripts? Plagiarism itself is the unethical practice of using someone else's work or ideas intentionally or accidentally as our own, without permission or acknowledging their contributions. This can be in the form of literally just copying and pasting or paraphrasing other words or ideas as our own. Using one's own previous work without proper acknowledgement is known as self-plagiarism. Plagiarism is a serious offense with potentially severe repercussions. There are instances where researchers have lost their jobs, they lost their reputation, and even revocation of their PhD and articles have been retracted. We must seek permission wherever necessary and correctly cite original sources. Okay. The types of plagiarism. Direct plagiarism. That is the intentional word-for-word copying of someone else's manuscript without acknowledgement or acknowledging their contribution. Self-plagiarism. That is when you reuse your own words or your own work without acknowledging it. Mosaic plagiarism. That is the unacknowledged use of poorly paraphrased content. Or accidental plagiarism, unintentional use of content without citing sources or misquoting them. So the quick tips to avoid plagiarism: give credit to the work by documenting the full name of sources and publication of any citation required as per the style guideline. Use quotation marks around the text if you're directly citing them, while inserting verbatim in your work to denote that these words aren't your own. Carefully paraphrase the sources with information without changing its meaning. Present perspective while writing instead of copy pasting the source's ID information. So it is better to paraphrase than directly quote. And use plagiarism check tools to avoid potential or even accidental plagiarism. So our recommended guidelines include: acknowledge the contribution of other researchers, ensure transparency while disseminating your findings via different means, paraphrase or use quotation while reusing other or your own previous published work, cite information concepts or fact may seem like a common knowledge, quote and properly cite verbatim. When you are directly citing verbatim, quote. Acquaint yourself with copyright laws. Ensure reproducing the exact meaning of the original idea by using proper language and terminology. Paraphrase using your own words. Paraphrasing is expressing the meaning of something written or spoken by using different words. There's a fine line between plagiarism and paraphrasing. When it's word for word, that is absolutely plagiarism. If you can refine something into your own words, then that is paraphrasing. If a text is too close to the text in the original content, then it's usually plagiarism. Read the paragraph first, make notes and compile those notes, change the structure and reword, correctly mention the original source, and if you are directly quoting, you must use quotes. So for example, the original content in this manuscript, critical care nurses function in a hierarchy of roles. In this open heart surgery unit, the nurse manager hires and fires the nursing personnel. The nurse manager does not directly care for patients, but follows the progress of a usual or long-term patient. So in this example, word for word plagiarism, it's basically the same as the original content, but some of the words have been used and placed in between them. So have a has been put in between critical nurses and hierarchy of roles. And nurses manager has been put in this particular place. That is an example of word for word paraphrasing. Versus patchwork paraphrase, when you take little patches of that manuscript and reshuffle them into your text. So function in a hierarchy comes from the original text. Nursing hiring and firing comes from the original text. And follow unusual or long-term cases also comes from the original text. Now, if you rewrite it into your own words, this is legitimate paraphrase. In her study of the roles of nurses in a critical care unit, Chase, 1995, found a hierarchy that distinguished the roles of experts and others. The roles of the expert nurses managers included employing unit nurses and overseeing the care of special patients. So in this text, the original content was rephrased and reworded to be original. Quotations are generally used to include especially inspiring or historical significant language to present a particularly well-stated passage whose meaning would be lost if paraphrased. So be very mindful when you are quoting. Use that very limitedly. You may use ellipsis points to indicate omission without a quotation, within the quotation. Within quotation, you may use brackets to add clarification, comments, or corrections. And you may use the * symbol to indicate that a mistake in the source you're quoting and is not your own. Okay. So let's see an example of quoting. In the original context, it states, because of their unique perspective, Americans fear globalization less than anyone else. And as a consequence, they think about it less than anyone else. When Americans do think about globalization, they think of the global economy as an enlarged version of the American economy. In this plagiarized version, the person took exactly word for word, because of their unique perspective, Americans fear globalization less than anyone else. Therefore, think about it less than anyone else. So this is direct plagiarism. There are no quotations. This is not acceptable. However, if you are quoting with the quotation marks, you may do so if these words are very profound. And in this example, we see Americans fear globalization less than anyone else. And as a consequence, notice there's omission of a few words about it, and then continues with think about it less than anyone else. So this is a legitimate quoting, and a small part of the original quote was removed and replaced with these ellipses. Now, there could be consequences to plagiarism. This, for example, is a retraction due uh, by excuse me. This is a retraction because in the in Elsevier, in the manuscript Biochemia, because the author, the supervisor used data without permission from the student. So this was a retraction. And in this other example, in Nature's scientific reports, there was a retraction because the article directly quoted significant portions of someone else's texts and equation from a previously published data. So without attribution. So these are consequences of plagiarism. Okay, so at Hindawi, we have tools to avoid plagiarism. Of course, there's a crude way of checking for it, which is using Google. You could just Google text and see if it comes up. But a more sophisticated way is to use this program called Authenticate, which is similar to Turnitin or Plagiarism Check X. And this allows for direct analysis to look for plagiarism. Generally, the similarity levels of between 10 and 20% are generally accepted by editors, but it does depend on the journal itself. So this is an example of Authenticate, which is a tool which we use at Hindawi, and we can see where significant parts of a manuscript is plagiarized, and all of these markings that are highlighted, whether in purple or green or red or blue, show that they've been taken from someone else's manuscript. So this is a very strong program to look for it. It checks for original work from potential plagiarism. It's easy to submit through this, and it looks for similarity against the world's top published works, which includes 70 billion plus current ICOG pages and 170 million articles, scholarly articles. Okay. At Inango, we have advanced plagiarism check services. So you could submit your manuscript directly into Authenticate. It accepts all forms, all formats. The manuscript is scanned for plagiarism. The report is shared highlighting potential areas, such as the previous page, and the turnaround is about 1 business day. Now, the legal consequences of intellectual property right violations include so for the intellectual property rights, it protects innovative creations of the mind that include form of multidisciplinary fields. IPR disables the unfair use of created idea by others. So, which includes copyright, literary work, film, music, artistic work, architectural design, scholarly manuscripts, as well as industrial property such as patents, trademarks, industrial designs, and geographical indications. The consequences of intellectual property rights infringement include could result in imprisonment of the violator, depending on the nature of the violation, loss of practicing license, civil charges filed by the IP owner, financial damage, criminal fines, and in some cases, prosecutors may ask for a huge amount of settlement for this. I'd like to thank you for your time. I'd like to thank Hindawi and Inago for providing this webinar. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Michael, for that presentation. So yeah, I'll move on to my section, which is Hindawi's approach to publication ethics and plagiarism. I'm the Research Integrity Manager at Hindawi, so I'll be speaking from that perspective. And I'll be talking about, I just wanted to start with the publication ethics considerations when preparing and submitting an article. So this is I wanted to focus on the things that you can bear in mind as authors when you're preparing and submitting your articles. So I'm not going to be talking too much about the more deliberate acts of misconduct like plagiarism, like fabrication and falsification. These are sort of things that you might just need a bit of a nudge in the right direction to think about when you're preparing your manuscript. And they've been taken from our publication ethics policies, which you can see the link on the bottom of the screen there. So the first policy that we have is about plagiarism, and I won't talk about that too much now because I've got a few slides about that later, but it's important that your manuscript is original and in your own words. We also have a policy on duplicate submission and redundant publication. So duplicate submission would be submitting your article to more than one journal at the same time, which is not okay because it's just a waste of reviewers' time, journals' time and resources, which are already quite stretched. And it can also lead to redundant publication, which is multiple instances of the publication of the same article, which is also problematic. So obviously also if your article is already published, don't resubmit it again. And if you want to, it also links with translations. So if you want to publish a translation, just make sure that that's clearly flagged up to the editorial office, who will consider it on a case-by-case basis. So citation manipulation, there's two broad categories. There's self-citation and coercive citation. So self-citation is obviously excessive citation to your own work, but we also want you to think about citing any particular colleagues or potentially editors and reviewers that you might think might be in a position to handle your work when you're submitting to a journal. So any citations to any particular person should be avoided in excess, and you should just cite people when directly relevant. So this comes up sometimes when we run our special issues because they have a generally smaller editorial board, and sometimes authors think that they can tailor their citations to benefit the listed editors, and that's not okay, and we have checks to prevent that from happening. So, and conflicts of interest from the point of view of preparing your articles, just disclose any potential financial conflicts, and this is any potential conflicts. So even if you think it's not an issue, definitely let us know, and it should be disclosed in your conflicts of interest statement. It's just important because if we discover conflicts of interest post-publication, we can be doing corrections and retractions. So it's really important so that people are aware whether there was any commercial involvement. So we're thinking about commercial funding, commercial affiliations, any patents that you might have, and it can be direct or indirect. So even if you think that it might not have affected your work, then still let us know and we can help you out. Last point is about authorship, and it's really important that all authors meeting the requirements for authorship are given the opportunity to be listed as authors on the manuscript. And also it's important that all authors listed on the article should be meeting those criteria for authorship. And we refer to the ICMJ requirements for authorship, and we strongly encourage the use of author contribution statements. So in terms of ensuring quality at Hindawi journals, all of our articles are screened by our editorial staff. A lot of the checks are tailored to the policies. So we have checks on plagiarism using the Authenticate software that has already been talked about. And if it meets all of our submissions checks by our editorial office, it will pass through to the peer review process, which at Hindawi is handled by our external academic editors and reviewers, so experts in the field. It's all done by external academics. And then following peer review, we check all of our articles again to ensure the quality of both the manuscript, because it might have changed during the peer review process, and also to check the quality of the peer review process itself. So we check for things like the coercive citation from reviewers, make sure that the reviewers have conducted themselves well, and there's no issues with conflicts of interest with reviewers and stuff like that. And then from submission to publication, our editors and editorial office staff are supported by an expert team of research integrity editors and managing editors. So if there's any issues identified by our editors, or if our internal staff might not have expertise in the more complicated cases. We have these expert teams, so I lead the research integrity team, and if problems come up, we just make sure that they're handled consistently and appropriately. And it's quite common for a lot of the big publishers now to have these more expert teams. So talking a bit about plagiarism more specifically, this is our policy on plagiarism at Hindawi, and I won't talk about it now, so I've broken this down in the next couple of slides about what our policy is. So the first point is that authors must not use the words, figures, or ideas of others without attribution. So you must write things in your own words. Figures must be original, and figures also text, but mainly figures. I think about this distinction between the publication ethics concern and the legal aspect. So there can be copyright and legal concerns, but really as editors we think more about the publication ethics concerns and the fact that it's just morally unacceptable to be passing off somebody else's work as your own. But when legal issues do come up, we have a legal team to support us in handling those. And as an open access publisher, we don't have any copyright to protect ourselves. So it's not, we don't go out enforcing copyrights because our articles are published as open access articles, and authors retain the open license. So we don't have an interest in pursuing our copyright. So, but you still have to attribute if you're using any of our articles. So the issue of plagiarism is still there, even though the copyright is not there. And it's a responsibility of authors to ensure that all the necessary permissions have been obtained for the publication of figures. And this includes components of images. So if you're building figures and diagrams using images that you might have got from just Google searches and stuff like that, just make sure that each component of the images is you have the right permissions for. And lastly, on this point, avoiding text overlap is insufficient to avoid the plagiarism of ideas. So we have lots of layers to our checks, and this is where our external experts, the handling editors and reviewers, really help us out, because they'll be topic experts that can really get a sense for any overlapping ideas in the fields. So all sources must be cited at the point they're used. I think we've covered this quite a bit already. So wherever you reuse any text, idea or figure, it must be immediately followed by a clear citation. And any reuse of wording must be limited and attributed or quoted in the text. So plagiarism can't be avoided by slightly changing the wording, and it's not possible to, if it's not possible to change the wording without altering the meaning, the text should be presented as a clear quotation and reproduced verbatim. And we use the cross-check similarity authenticate software to help us detect submissions that overlap with published and submitted manuscripts. And it's really easy for us to see, so I'll show you an example later when this happens. And our trained editorial office team interpret these text overlap reports for potential concerns, and we've got the research integrity there to offer support if the issues are more complicated or more nuanced. And as I said before, it's less easy for us to use software to spot plagiarism of ideas, but this is where our editors and reviewers help us out. And the last part of our policy is that when we find that manuscripts have been plagiarized by other authors, whether published or unpublished, submissions will be rejected and authors may incur sanctions, and any published articles may need to be corrected or retracted. So our research integrity editors work closely with our academic editors and our editorial office to ensure that plagiarism concerns are identified and satisfactorily resolved. And as I said, they're always interpreted by humans, so we don't go by straight percentage rules. They can be helpful in guiding our attention to manuscripts, but at the end of the day, we have our trained staff are interpreting these reports to really determine the context of any overlap, because some of it may be significant and some of it might not be. And then for minor concerns, we might take the opportunity to educate authors and ask them to revise areas of their manuscripts if we identify it on submission. But for more serious cases, we'll reject submissions, and if it's identified post-publication, we will retract them. And we might also reach out to authors' institutions to make them aware of our concerns as well. So this is my last slide, and it just shows an example of what the text overlap reports look like. So you can see on the left-hand panel, I've said that the abstract section specifically is the least problematic. There are still obviously issues here, and it shows some of the fragmentation. So I just thought the first part there, where it's highlighted this paper to review the evidence, it shows why, I mean, disregarding the rest of the plagiarism, I mean, just that first sentence on its own is showing some overlap with some source, but it might not necessarily be that significant to us, which is why we need these trained staff to interpret these reports. But as you can see on the subsequent panels to the right hand side, there was actually more than this, but in the two cases I picked out, there's two really strong overlapping sources, and they were not cited in the manuscript, and they don't belong to the author. So it wasn't self-plagiarism, it was plagiarism from somebody else. And this was actually identified in a published article, so Hindawi hasn't always used Authenticate. So in one of our older publications, we decided to rescreen manuscripts from a period of time when we weren't using it. So if there are issues in published articles, we will make the effort to correct the published literature. And in this example, when we identified the issues, we did go ahead and retract the article. So I think the point here is just make sure that you're putting the effort in submission, because you know, it might not be an issue that's, even if it does slip through the process, if we identify it following publication, it will be a retraction if it is a serious case. So it's really important to be thinking about these things. And yeah, that was my last slide. There's some resources here. So the ICNJ recommendations have good policies on conflicts of interest and authorship, for example. The publication ethics is for COPE that have good general research integrity guidance. And there's a few links to Hindawi policies, and there's a blog from our head of editorial policy and ethics from a couple of years ago, and the Crossref site there.
We thank both our speakers for this enlightening session. We would once again like to thank all the attendees for joining the webinar.